Aziz, how is this going to work? Are you going to field the questions? Is that what you said?
Yes, we will just going to ask you some questions. Okay, we are now recording. Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
Jo.
too.
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. A bit nervous about the idea that anything could come, but that's okay.
Okay, so nice to meet you. Okay, so you can just start by a little introduction about you,
Okay.
about your job, what you do. We are very much interested in your work as a trainer, as an ELT trainer. We are also very much interested in what you do in your university, and also we are interested in the site, the web site, which is called the ELT training site.
ELT training.
Yes. So we would like you to introduce yourself to our Moroccan audience. We are extremely happy to have you today. And as I said, just make a little introduction about yourself.
Sure.
And
nobody's
after
here
that,
yet.
we
Is that
will.
right?
What?
Am I right in thinking that nobody's here yet, or what, how does this work exactly?
No, you will just introduce yourself, and then we'll start the questions. It's a little bit discussion. It's just a discussion.
But I can't see anybody else in the room. That's my question? But this is via Facebook. Is this how it works? I haven't done this before in terms of the Facebook thing.
We're having a bit of problem going live, but we're going to post this on Facebook in a while.
So we're recording this and then posting it on Facebook?
Yeah, there's some kind of problem.
Yes, immediately. Yes.
Okay, but it's not people here asking questions.
They're waiting for it. They're waiting for it, but technical problems happen.
I see.
Yeah.
So how's it going to work then? Sorry, tell me how it's going to work.
So just introduce yourself to our Moroccan.
You want me to introduce myself? Yeah.
What?
You just want me to introduce myself?
Yes, of course. We would like to know more about your background.
Let me do that now. Okay. So my name's Jo Gakonga. I would call myself an English teacher and educator, I suppose. I work at Warwick University. My official job title is Senior Teaching Fellow. And I work on the MA TEFL, and I also run CELTA courses there. That's part of my work. Another part of my work is that I have a website at elttraining.com, which I've been developing over the last 8 years, I suppose. And I make teacher training material mainly for novice teachers, mainly for CELTA trainees, I guess. Another part of my work is that I am involved very heavily with CELTA, so I'm a CELTA trainer. I'm also an assessor, so I go and see different CELTA courses and assess them. I'm doing one tomorrow in Dublin, it's a bit online, obviously. And I'm also what's called a joint chief assessor, which means that I check other people's assessment reports, basically, which is quite an interesting job, and I really enjoy being involved with Cambridge in that way. As well as that, I'm doing a PhD within the subject of teacher mentoring, I suppose, learning to be a mentor. And that involves part of the work that I do at Warwick. And that's a mentor training program that I've developed as part of our teacher education program. So
so your life is pretty busy.
I'm quite busy, yes. I have 3 grown-up children. The youngest is 16 now, so that's got a bit easier. But yeah, I'm pretty busy. I like to be busy.
So you are a trainer and you are an assessor. You assess the assessors, right?
An assistant?
Right? You assess the people.
Assess, yeah. So I'm an assessor, so I go to assess other courses as well. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and also you train people who would like to have the CELTA, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we run just 2 courses a year usually at Warwick. I've been a CELTA trainer now for over 20 years, actually. Yeah,
Wow.
I think it's about my 20th year. I think I started in 2000, so yeah, quite a long time.
That's great. So what do you know, do you have any idea about the Moroccan ELT community? Or have you ever visited Morocco, or have any idea
Sorry,
about
the connection's bad. I can't hear you very well.
I said, do you have any idea about the ELT in Morocco?
ELT
in Morocco.
in
Yes.
Morocco?
English then.
No, not very
Yes.
much. I have visited Morocco. I went there about a bit long while ago now, I suppose, actually probably about 7 years ago, just for a holiday, and I really enjoyed it. I had a lovely time actually, but I haven't been there in any kind of professional capacity, so no, I don't know very much about ELT in Morocco.
Okay, good. Okay, as you know, we have received some questions from our audience.
Sure.
And you know, our audience is mainly composed of teachers and students, and you know, people who are interested to join the teaching profession, as you know.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay, maybe we can start with the first one. Is it's a little bit related to the communicative approach. So the question is how to teach large classes using a communicative approach.
This is a really interesting question and a difficult question, I think. In my work at Warwick, I often have contact with the Hornby scholars, and these people often people from places where there are very large classes. So last year, for example, I was supervising a man from South Sudan who was looking at communicative approach in large classes, in classes of 60, 80, 100 people, in children or teenagers, whatever, in high school in South Sudan. He did his dissertation research on this, and it is a very difficult problem, I think, because there are very practical issues about how do you get people talking when you've got such large classes, especially if you've got no other support. So I think that the kind of experience that I've personally had is not in that context, but as I say, I do know quite a lot about people who have. I think there are still things that you can do. I mean, if I say it's easy, of course I'm being very naive about this. It isn't easy. But I think that there are things, and sometimes in this particular context I'm thinking about, another context I have a lot of Chinese students, and often class sizes are very large in China too. It's common to have 60 in a class. I think that there are some sort of practical issues about noise levels, which make pair work difficult. But you could do things like, for example, conversations which are written. I write what I want to say, and I give it to you, and you write it down. So you could have more of a conversation on paper, for example. It's very hard when you're trying to monitor groups like that. I think you can have situations where you've got groups where you've got people in where you nominate particular, maybe stronger learners, some of your stronger learners, to act as coordinators for group work. Harry Kutcher, who's very famous for looking at large classes, did his PhD at Warwick in our department, and I know him a little. And his work in Cameroon was like this, where he was having 200 students in a class, and but was having to take them outside and be teaching in groups and with nominating stronger learners as coordinators, I suppose, almost. So I think there are ways in which you can have some kind of communicative approach, and certainly perhaps looking at language, looking at teaching in a way that it's meaningful, maybe. So even if, for me, part of the communicative approach is that language is meaningful to the people. So you're not learning, you know, this is my head, this is, you know, a table, but you're actually trying to put it in some sort of meaningful context, something which makes sense, something which you might actually want to say. And so I think that that kind of angle of CLT can certainly be still used in larger classes. But I think it's a very difficult question to answer, and I think, you know, that there is no easy answer to that one, definitely.
So I understand from your answer that teaching large classes is a real challenge.
Yes,
because it is related to maybe to discipline problems, to behavior. Because you cannot
behavior, absolutely. So, I mean, that's another major issue that, again, you know, I haven't, in honesty, had a lot of experience with, because my experience is largely with adults. Although I have got a primary school, I'm a qualified primary school teacher, and I've taught primary school for a couple of years. But you know, that's definitely another issue for sure.
Yes, that's a problem. So, what is there a specific number for teaching for applying the communicative approach, or maybe it's cannot be
I think no is the answer to your question. No, I mean, if you're looking for a magic wand that says this is the answer, and I can just tell you in 5 minutes what to do, you know, it doesn't exist. This is a really difficult problem, and I think, as I say, there are things in situations where the teacher can't even get around the classroom physically because there are too many children in it. Well, you know, that clearly makes anything but quite a lockstep approach very difficult. And I don't think there are magic wand answers to those things. But as I say, I think that maybe thinking about motivation, it depends as well on the situation, about how you know, is technology available, for example, which, for example, in a lot of Chinese classes, there would be access to technology, whereas in South Sudan, there isn't. So, you know, these kind of things, technology can help using different situations, things like, I don't know, for example, Quizlet or various other things to involve learners outside of class, to make it more of a flipped classroom type approach, perhaps. But it's without that, that's another difficulty. You know, if you've got low resource classrooms, which often is the case in large classrooms, then that makes it even more difficult.
What about our
to the teachers who work
our situation now? Is communicative approach can go the same online as it was in the classroom, face to face? I mean,
yes, why not? I mean, I don't see any reason why you should change your principles. And, you know, I see a lot, it's interesting, I've been watching a lot of online teaching because of, you know, my work as an assessor and CELTA being fully online now. And I think that it's interesting that being in front of a screen like this maybe exacerbates the problem of being the teacher at the front and giving information. But I don't think there's any reason at all why that needs to be the case. You know, you can have breakout rooms, and you can you know, monitor around, and you can involve learners in lots of ways. You get them to write on the whiteboard themselves, getting them to, you know, to answer in the chat, even if there are large class sizes for that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't see any reason at all why you shouldn't use a CLT type approach with, you know, in an online environment.
Okay, good. So we will move to another question from our audience. What are the perspectives after obtaining CELTA?
The prospective work, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Again, that depends. There are a lot of it depends. And also, obviously, the situation now with COVID and what have you has changed life dramatically in terms of teaching. There's a lot less face-to-face teaching around than there used to be, of course. So it depends on the context. If you're talking about Moroccan teachers, is that what is that what you mean specifically?
Yes, yes.
Then it depends a bit. I mean, if you are a non-native speaker of English, I would like to say that there's no prejudice against that, and there shouldn't be, but there is in many instances, I'm afraid, in our industry. It's still not great from that point of view. So that can make things a bit more difficult. My experience is that CELTA often opens doors for people, that a lot of people that I've trained who are already qualified teachers in their own context have chosen to do CELTA because it allows them to do work, for example, in private language schools, which may be, may have slightly better conditions and pay than in the, in the public sector. So that's one reason why people do it, I think. It's well recognised. The other difficulty, of course, is getting a visa to work in other countries. So it depends whether you want to work in Morocco in a different context, perhaps, with adults instead of with children, perhaps in smaller classes, perhaps, in those sort of institutions. And I don't know the situation in Morocco well, so it would be foolish of me to try and, expound on that. The other thing, of course, as I say, with other places is that it's not always necessarily about the issue of being a non-native speaker, it's about the visa. So for example, if you want to go and work in China, you kind of have to have a British, American, Canadian, Australian, I think South African passport in order to work there. So there are some difficulties like that, for sure.
Okay. Can you walk us through the process of getting the CELTA from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, assessment, etc.?
Sure.
Is there a certain process, and is it different from the online process, or maybe they are the same?
Okay. Well, I mean, if anybody's interested in, particularly in CELTA, then have a look on my site, because I've got a free resource that is called Applying for CELTA, and it talks you all the way through that, but I'm happy to talk you through it too. So what happens is that the first thing that you would do is choose a centre. Now, ordinarily in the pre-COVID world, that would have to have been a face-to-face centre, because there was always a face-to-face component to CELTA. Since March this year, Cambridge developed a fully online CELTA, and they're planning that will continue now. Originally it was going to be a temporary measure, but they've decided it is going to continue. So you can do CELTA, online from any centre that you like in the world. The first stage would be to apply. So there's an application form which involves a written task. It involves some language tasks about language awareness, knowledge of grammar and that sort of thing, other pedagogical things. You then, assuming that that's accepted, then you would go for an interview to the centre. I think that would be online probably at the moment, almost everywhere. And during that interview, you may be asked to do a little bit of a peer teach. You will certainly be asked to do some language tasks to talk about, given, for example, you might be given a sentence and asked what the tense was or what parts of speech were. You might be asked to explain a word as if you were explaining it to a learner. And so the interview is like that, and we'll give you information also about the course. Assuming that you're accepted onto that, then you'll be given a pre-course task to complete, so you've got preparation to do beforehand, and that, I think is really important. The more preparation you can do beforehand, the better it is. It's a very short course, it's 120 hours. You can do it in 4 weeks, or you can do it part-time over a bit longer, but the majority of courses worldwide are 4-week courses. It's slightly longer if it's online. And so then, yes, then you go through the course, and the course is very practical. About 70 of those 120 hours will be in the classroom, even if that's an online classroom teaching. So you'll be teaching, you'll be watching your peers teach, you'll be talking about teaching and feedback, you'll be having guided lesson preparation with your tutor. And then there's also input sessions where the tutor will talk you through different different things like learning how to teach grammar, learning how to teach vocabulary, lesson planning, classroom management, things like this. There are 4 assignments that you have to do during the course, and you'll probably teach 8 or 9 times during the course for between, sometimes shorter, but up to an hour, maximum of an hour, and usually around 45 minutes each time. And you'll get feedback on that.
Okay, so I understand from your answer that the CELTA and the TEFL, are there any similarities between those two? Or maybe they are a little bit different?
Okay, so TEFL just stands for Teach English as a Foreign Language. And so there are many TEFL courses. CELTA is a TEFL course. But usually when people say a TEFL course, what they mean is a short online only course. And again, I did a blog post about this quite recently, so it's it's on my site if people want to have a look. TEFL courses tend to be much cheaper than CELTA. They don't tend to include teaching practice. They're better than nothing, but employers tend to value CELTA or the Trinity Cert TESOL course, which is an equivalent to CELTA. To value those two because they have teaching practice, because they have assessed teaching practice. So that's, I think, what employers value. They feel that they've got a good idea if people have done that course, one of those 2 courses, either the Trinity Cert TESOL or CELTA, that people have actually done something and been judged on what they've done in the classroom, not just what they know.
Okay. So I always see that part of the requirement of getting a job as a teacher, even if you have a CELTA or a TEFL or any other qualification, they always ask for a native speaker. Don't you think this is a little bit unfair?
I think it's completely unfair, and it's stupid. It's completely stupid. Because there are 2 things here with language teaching. There is your proficiency, the proficiency of your language, and there is the proficiency of your teaching. There are 2 things, and they're different things. And so you might have a native speaker who obviously their language proficiency will be very good. Their teaching may be rubbish. You may also have the opposite situation where you have a non-native speaker, perhaps whose English is not actually all that proficient, but their teaching is very good. And obviously what you really want is for both of those things to be good. So you want people who are proficient in the language, for sure. That's important, I think. But also who are proficient in teaching and pedagogical skill. So the 2 things are important. And I think to prioritize one over the other is ludicrous. I also think that for, if you are a non-native speaker, then you have made that journey yourself. You've learned English, you know the road, you know what's difficult. And you also serve as a much better role model than a native speaker, actually. Because if I'm a 14-year-old Moroccan child, and I'm wanting to learn English, and I see my native speaker teacher and I think, well, I'm never going to be that good. But if I see my Moroccan teacher who speaks extremely good English, and I think, well, they were in the same position as me and they've got that good, I can do it too. So I think potentially it's much more motivating to have a non-native speaker. The difficulty, a lot of non-native speaker teachers, I think, feel unsure about the phonological model that they're providing. But again, the way I speak is not the same as an American colleague speaks, or an Australian, or a South African, or an Indian colleague, or anybody else. So I think it's I think it's really important that these things are not considered to be priorities. Good proficiency in English, yes. Native speakers, no. And anyway, what is a native speaker, I suppose? I think that if anybody is interested in this argument, then they should go and have a look at the plenary speech that Silvana Richardson did a few years ago at TEFL, which, yeah, she's a non-native speaker of English, an extremely successful one. She's from Argentina, I think I'm right in saying. And she did a really, really inspirational plenary that was exactly about this. And I think the argument is not there. Obviously, I think some private schools feel that having a native speaker is a good marketing tool, perhaps, but I think that anybody worth their salt in terms of being a manager should understand that, you know, the two things, that language ability and teaching ability aren't the same thing.
Yes, language ability and teaching ability are not the same. Okay. So I asked you this question because I always find this as a requirement to apply for a teaching job abroad. And being a native speaker doesn't equal a successful, effective language teaching.
Absolutely not. So some of the, you know, certainly on CELTA and on the MA, some of the most successful teachers that I have, in fact, it's probably very common because they've got a better knowledge of language, are the non-native speaker teachers. So yeah, for sure. And I think my other feeling is that perhaps, I think it is changing, that this has been, people like TEFL equity advocates and organisations like that are making some kind of difference, that things aren't as bad perhaps as they used to be. I would hope that would be the case, and that certainly more enlightened schools and organisations would not be as prejudiced as that. It's certainly, you know, it's ludicrous.
Okay. So can you perhaps share a website of the CELTA, you know, of people who are interested to go through the CELTA? Is there any particular site?
Well, of course, I would recommend mine, elttraining.com.
Yes, of course, yes.
If you mean for preparation, or what do you mean?
I mean for people who would like to get CELTA from you.
Oh, from me? Well, as
Yes.
I say, I work at Warwick University, so, you know, have a look on that site there.
So do you do it through the university, right?
Yes, I do. We're not actually running a course though until summer next year. We only usually run 2 a year, and it's been decided because of COVID that we won't run them. We won't run our part-time course this year, so our next course will be summer. So you'd have to wait a little while if you really want me. But what I would say is that all CELTA centres everywhere in the world are very standard. So it doesn't matter where you take your course, you'll get exactly the same certificate. And the course itself will be very standard too, that this is mandated. You know, Cambridge are very careful to maintain a standard, and each course is assessed by somebody from outside to ensure that the standard is maintained and is the same. So it doesn't really matter where you do it, I would say.
Yes, but we know that you are an expert in this. That's why we asked for a website or something like that. As you said, people can do it through the university. I said that people can do it through the university of
Sure.
Warwick.
I mean, there are quite a few universities in the UK that offer CELTA. We're not the only one. There are a number. It doesn't matter whether you are, you know, whether you take it in a university or not. I mean, for example, I think our facilities are quite nice because, you know, it's a nice environment. Warwick's a very comfortable university, so we have nice facilities, got a nice library and, you know, nice classrooms, what have you. But these are small, superficial things, and the actual course is the same wherever you take it. So it really doesn't matter where you take it, I think.
Okay, at the end of the CELTA, when people finish the CELTA, is there the ideas that they learned in the course in actual classrooms?
Sorry, is there ideas for what?
The ideas that they learned in the CELTA, the courses,
Yes.
after they finish the CELTA, is there an opportunity for them to practice in actual classrooms?
Well,
in front of students?
What you mean without getting a job? I'm sorry, I don't understand.
No, without getting a job, before getting a job.
Well,
just
I
a
mean,
practice.
You know, I mean, I mean, you are working in an actual classroom when you do CELTA. It's not peer teaching. It's, you know, you're teaching real learners all the time. So you would have that experience of teaching in real classrooms. Some people in the UK do voluntary teaching. You know, there are quite a lot of organisations that teach asylum seekers and refugees and people who want free classes. So those kind of opportunities do exist. And I think, yeah, those sort of things probably exist online too, I'm sure. But I would suggest that people actually go and try and find some paid work. It's, you know, you've done the qualification in order to get work, and you should be able to. It should be possible.
Okay, another question which is a little bit slightly different. How do we enhance vocabulary learning?
Oh, that's an enormous question, isn't it? It's a very big question. And I suppose it depends what exactly. Oh, crikey! You could take all sorts of tacks on that one, I suppose. I think that part of vocabulary learning is, yeah, just about learning the stuff, and there are lots of great apps that you can use for that. Things like Duolingo, for example, you know, is good for that kind of, yeah, rote learning of vocabulary. It's quite good, I think. I don't think it's necessarily good for everything, but it's good for that. Quizlet is fantastic, I think, for learning vocabulary. You can make your own lists, or there's lists up there already that are free and you can easily access. You can do it on your phone, you know, you've got a smartphone. So I think that kind of thing can be really helpful. Maybe having some kind of target where you say, I'm going to learn 5 words a day or 10 words a day or whatever it is, helps. Learning chunks of vocabulary rather than single words, trying to learn functional phrases can really help to give people to sound more fluent. So rather than just learning, you know, should, for example, you might learn if I were you, I would. If I were you, I'd. If I were you, I'd. As a single chunk, not worrying about analysing it. I think that, you know, again, learning collocations, for example, words that go together. Yes. So particularly where those things are, yeah, dependent prepositions and things, is important, you know, to insist on doing something. So not just learning insist, but learning insist on doing something, or I insist on helping you, or something, you know, in a longer chunk can be helpful. I think that input is really important. So extensive reading, extensive watching, you know, watching things on YouTube, for example, with subtitles in English or in your own language, I think is helpful. You know, the more that you can do that, things that you enjoy, films or sitcoms or TED Talks, or, you know, all of that kind of stuff, reading extensively. There are lots of ways in which I think those things can be helped. Quizzes in class, you know, I think recycling of language is really important. So there are things on my site. There's a nice little continuing professional development session called Digging for Lexis, which is about exploiting lexis from texts in class. So there's quite a lot of ideas in there for how to use the texts that you would ordinarily use in class for further lexis development, for further vocabulary development. Paul Nation is obviously a person who's done a lot of research into vocabulary development, and he has a lot of things on his site. If you Google Paul Nation, you'll find a lot of things, papers that he's written, and also resources that are useful. So that's something else to think about.
So
it's a big question, though. I mean, I think you could talk all night about it, in honesty.
Yes. The problem of vocabulary is that when you teach vocabulary, students don't use it. Don't use the vocabulary you teach them.
Yeah.
Don't use it in writing. Don't use it in speaking. Don't use it.
Yeah.
It is somewhere in the brain.
Yes, I think that's very, very true. That you can be, you know, teaching all this stuff in class, and then you give them some kind of practice activity, and they just go back to whatever they were using before. That's true with the grammatical structures too. I think you can encourage people to do so by making it, you know, motivating. So, for example, if you had taught, I don't know, 10 words about a particular subject, or functional phrases or whatever, you wanted them to use them, those things could be, you know, in a classroom. Those could be on a piece of paper, or they could be displayed on a board or something, and somehow they have to tick it online, and somehow they have to tick them off when they use them. You know, you kind of force them into it. Make it a team game, give them points if they use the vocabulary that you know you're after practicing, that sort of thing. And recycling, you know, I think that's the thing, is if you teach it in one class, then the next lesson go through it again, you know, have some, and again have some kind of quiz, or something that's fun and quick fire, where they have to try and remember it or have to use it in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm.
So maybe perhaps teaching vocabulary is like teaching grammar. We keep teaching the structures and students keep forgetting. So
yeah,
it's a hard job.
I think that's the nature of learning, is that, you know, you don't learn something and then it's there. It's not like building a wall. It's much more like growing a garden. So, you know, you plant some seeds over here, and you water them, and you watch them grow a little bit, and that's great. And then you go out to another part of the garden and you plant some different seeds, and then you realize that the seeds you planted yesterday have died, and so you have to go back and give them a bit of love, and then you realize that something else is going berserk, and you have to go and cut that back, all the errors they're making or something. So I think it's much, that for me, that's a really good metaphor for learning a language and teaching a language, is thinking about growing a garden. You know, it's an organic process, and it isn't static. It isn't, I've taught them the present perfect, or I've taught them vocabulary about furniture or something, and they'll never forget it. Of course they will, unless unless they have to use it.
Yes, of course. Yes. So planting seeds, keep planting seeds. That's your advice for teachers.
Yeah, plant seeds and keep watering them, I suppose. Keep looking after them. Don't just plant them and walk away. You've got to nurture them, perhaps.
Yes, water them, as you said. Okay.
Sure.
We have another question about the question is, I need more information on Warwick University studying programs.
You mean, well, I mean, the easy answer to that is to go to the website. The website's really comprehensive, and there's lots of information there. I did see another question was about scholarships at Warwick. And again, yes, if you go to the applied linguistics, if you Google Warwick applied linguistics, then you'll find the site there, and there's lots of information about the MA TESOL, which is the one that I teach on, and about various bursaries and scholarships that are available. There are a couple of bursaries that give you a reduction, and again, we also have Hornby scholars every year who are funded by the Hornby Trust, which is a fantastic organisation. I think if anybody was interested in doing an MA in the UK, then it would be a good thing to try to apply to the Hornby Trust. It's very competitive. There's a small number of places, but it's a really excellent organisation. I can't praise it highly enough. I think that partly the process of being able to study in a UK university at Warwick for the last 5 years. We've had 6 years, maybe a bit longer. We've had Hornby's, but also because of the wider network that's around that. Yeah, so those are the sort of things that you can apply for. But all the information for that is on the Warwick website on the Applied Linguistics page if you look for the MA TESOL.
Yeah, we can find the scholarships and stuff like that. There is also the idea of how can we enhance students' talking time, based teachers' talking time.
Okay.
How, the question is, yes, the question, how can we minimize teachers' talking time and maximize students' talking time?
Sure. I think there's a really easy answer to this, and that's you have to stop talking. As a teacher, you have to stop talking. So that's the easy answer. It's obviously not quite as straightforward as that. I suppose for me, the main thing is two things to be aware of. One is to be aware of your teacher language in all sorts of ways, actually. And the way you can do this is by recording yourself, just audio recording yourself on your phone and listen back to yourself, listen back to your class. That's a really good way of becoming aware of how much you talk. And the way to avoid it is to plan for learner-centered activities. If you plan for activities where they are talking together, then that's what your classroom will look like. If you don't plan for those things, then it's more likely that you're going to stand at the front and talk. I think that's that for me. So, and the way that things tend to go well in speaking activities are if things are interesting. So if the topics are interesting for the learners, if they're meaningful. So for example, if you asked me to talk about, I don't know, car maintenance, I don't really care. Or football, I don't care about football. I don't want to talk about football. If I were in an English class and being asked to talk about football, I don't think I'd talk very much because I don't care about it. But of course, it would motivate lots of people. There are lots of people it would motivate, but it wouldn't motivate me. Whereas if you ask me to talk about, I don't know, baking or something, I'm quite interested in that. So, so things that are meaningful for your learners is important. Personalization, things that they can talk about that are be personal to them. I'm going to tell you about the worst holiday I ever had, or, what I think about COVID and the situation at the moment. So those are things that are important. Things that have an end point rather than just talk about this. If you say, I want to, to answer these, here's 5 questions. I want you to choose 3 of them and ask your partner and get the answers back. And then I'm going to, ask you what the answers were or something. So a bit of learner autonomy is good too, I think. These are the sort of things, but mainly it's about planning to have practice. And I think it's hugely important, depending on, of course, what people are learning for. I mean, if you're learning English in order to take a written test, then, you're not going to be very motivated to learn to speak. But if you actually want to use language for its communicative purpose, then it's really important that you give time and space, I think, for speaking activities. And I think maybe teachers often think, well, it's a bit of a waste of time. It's, it's better if I teach them more grammar or something. But actually, there's a big difference between I know something here and I can get it to my mouth in time. There's a big difference. And that's what takes the time, the practice. And it's necessary. I think it is necessary. That's my personal belief as a teacher, that's not time wasted in class. It's really important time. And it's more likely perhaps also to motivate learners so that they'll develop a joy in the language and want to learn more and perhaps spend more time out of class watching films or listening to music or whatever in English.
Yes. So the idea is to stop talking and let the student do the job.
Yeah, I think those are the answers. And it sounds easy, doesn't it? You know, it sounds really easy. Just, you know, you want them to talk, plan for them to talk. It sounds very obvious,
Yes.
but I know, you know, it's a really hard, people talk for lots of reasons. They're
Yes.
nervous. They want to keep control. If you've got larger classes and things, it's harder to keep control if you're not there in the front. You know, there are lots of reasons why teachers end up talking a lot, but I think the secret is in the planning for sure. If you plan it that way, then, you know, then it will be that way. And being aware. So record yourself. That's always my best advice to people is record yourself, listen back to yourself. It won't be comfortable, but it will be really helpful for your practice and developing your practice.
Yes, maybe teachers, as you said, talk a lot because they don't teach speaking. We only focus on grammar, we focus on vocabulary, we focus on writing. We don't teach speaking or listening. Do you guys have the same issue?
It's difficult, isn't it? And again, yeah, perhaps it's partly because of practical problems. So if you've got very large classes, as we talked earlier, then, you know, then it's hard to do reasonable speaking things because there's just, you know, the noise levels become large. It becomes difficult to monitor. How do you ensure that they're not speaking L1? You know, all of these things are quite practical, difficult problems in larger classes for speaking. And also, again, you know, is speaking examined? My guess is that if you're teaching in a Moroccan high school, then probably speaking isn't examined. Is it? That's my question, actually. Is it examined?
No, it's not examined as a quiz, do you mean?
Sorry?
As a quiz, you mean?
No, I mean, for example, if I'm a Moroccan student in high school and I get to the end of my high school exams and I want to take an English and I take the English exam, does it include a speaking test?
I am not sure about university, but I think in high school it does not exist.
Because it's expensive to administer speaking tests. It's difficult. So, you know, I think that's why teachers may not focus on speaking, because it's not tested. You know, if I've got my class and I've got to get them to pass this exam and it's a written exam, then what am I going to do? Of course, I'm going to teach writing.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So, is there a way to teach speaking without getting involved in discipline problems? Because sometimes we want to teach speaking, but students, you know, tend to speak, you know, at all. They all speak at the same time. This creates problems for the teacher.
Sure, it's difficult, isn't it? But I think there is no other way, because if they're speaking one at a time, then, you know, even if you've got a small class, let's say, I don't know, 15 students, then if they're speaking one at a time, then that means that I'm speaking for 1 minute and I'm listening for 14 minutes. So of a 15-minute lesson, I'm only speaking for 1 minute if I'm speaking one at a time. So for me, that's just doesn't work, that I have to be doing pair work so that I can increase. Then if I'm doing pair work and I'm speaking with my partner, then I can speak for 7 minutes of the 14, you know, or 7.5 of the 15, whatever, in theory. Whereas if we're all just speaking one at a time, actually, I can't even speak for 1 minute because the teacher will be speaking for the other half a minute. I think I see the problems. With larger classes, this is very tricky, but I think there's no other answer except for pair and group work.
So another question: how can we develop our learning English as a second language in emergency teaching?
In emergency teaching? looking at emergent language, is that what you're talking about? Is that what the question is, do you think?
Yes, maybe.
Yeah.
Emergency teaching.
Okay. If you're talking about emergent language, then you know, this is something which you hear a lot about. There's a lot of talk of emergent language, and my understanding of that is that it's the language that is at the sort of cutting edge of what people know. And it's looking at the language that people need and that they will use. So especially if you're taking more of a sort of a task-based approach to teaching, or if you're taking a sort of dogma approach to teaching, then you're more likely to, you know, to come across that. My feeling is that if you're teaching very small groups, one-to-one, or, you know, very small groups, then yes, absolutely, that's what you should be doing. If you're teaching a group of, you know, 15 or 30, then it's a bit more difficult, because the language which you will notice is the language from the most confident students, because they're the ones who'll be speaking loudest and giving you answers most often. And so you kind of skew it towards the more able learners, which I think is not necessarily a good thing. So I think that it's important to listen to your learners, and it's important that you, I think as a teacher, that you should, you know, go in with a plan for what you want to teach, what you think is important, because you're the teacher and you do have some idea, hopefully, about what's important. But you should obviously teach that plan to the learners, and you should listen to the learners, and you should adjust what you do in class according to the needs that, you know, that emerge as you're going along. And I think that's just good teaching, really. I don't think it's anything more rocket science than that. You know, listen to your learners and try and accommodate their needs. But I think that the idea, for me, you know, the idea of a sort of a blank slate and we'll get it all from the learners is very difficult in larger classes. With smaller classes or one-to-one, absolutely. Why would you teach any other way? But most of us don't have the luxury of that environment. Most of us are teaching groups or larger groups. And I think it's, yeah, it becomes more difficult then.
So since we are talking about emergency teaching and stuff like that, do you have a favorite learning management system?
Sorry, do I have what?
I said, since we are talking about emergency teaching, do you have any favorite learning management system, like application?
You're talking about emergency teaching. So you mean because of COVID, you're talking about online stuff? Sorry, I think I went off on the wrong track. Okay, that's something a bit different, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, obviously most people are using either Zoom or Teams. And at the moment, Zoom seems to be the better option. I think also Blackboard Collaborate we use at Warwick as well, which is, you know, a really nice option and very similar to Zoom in lots of ways. Teams I find more cumbersome, but I'm told that there's a lot. I mean, it's bound to be. I mean, that there must be so many people beavering away in the organisations that develop these things at the moment. There's such pressure, and I believe that Teams is, you know, got some extra things coming on, breakout rooms, for example, which will make it much better. But to say that's those are the main two. It seems to me that most people are using. Zoom's, of course, incredibly popular.
So the next question, are there any free summer trainings for teachers in your university or in others that you know? Thanks.
Sorry, can you say that again? It's breaking up a bit. I can't hear.
Are there any free summer trainings for teachers in your university?
No.
Or any others that there you know?
No, I'm sorry, is the answer to that really. So I think that there won't be many places where you'll find free training per se. If you're talking about, you know, actual teacher training courses. But I mean, the sort of things that of course are free are things like MOOCs. So if you look at Future Learn, there are a lot of MOOCs on there which are applicable to teachers, and some of them are really, really good. And there's all sorts of things. There's things about teaching online. There's things about, you know, lesson planning. There's all sorts of different things on Future Learn actually that are really good. And also things like applied linguistics things too. Some universities like Lancaster, I think, and Southampton, for example, have got modules on there which are basically, I think it's really about advertising their MA courses, because they want people to like their stuff and then think about doing an MA. But lots of useful stuff you can do on there. Huge amounts of, you know, webinars and things that you can attend. TEFL has got, you know, lots of webinars. The British Council site is amazing. So much free CPD on there. Lots of good academic stuff and more practical stuff. So there's a whole raft of things that are useful there. I've got a resource on my site called Ideas and Resources for Busy Teachers. It's free, and that's got links to, it's got different sections. One of the sections is sort of links to lesson plans and things like that, and the other section is links for CPD, and there's links there for the MOOCs and for so MOOCs are massive open online courses, if anyone didn't know, and for different webinars and various other places where you can find. So YouTube is phenomenal. So much information. You know, you want to learn anything, go to YouTube. It's just quite incredible. And of course there's a lot of rubbish on there as well, so it's a bit difficult sometimes to sort the wheat from the chaff, but there's certainly a lot of wheat in there. There's a lot of good material on YouTube that's helpful for teachers, I think.
You mentioned Future Learn. I think also you talked about an EMA which is administered by Lancaster University, right?
I don't think it's. I don't know. Actually, is the truth. But certainly Lancaster University has courses on there, but so does Southampton and Cambridge put up courses about you know, that relate to teaching as well. So I don't know if it originates from there. Certainly they do have courses on there. Yeah.
How to keep track of new ways of student motivation, because it's really challenging.
Sorry, how to keep track of new ways of students' motivation?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I've lost you.
Because it is really challenging. The question says, how to keep track of new ways of students' motivation?
Ah, I'm not entirely sure what the person means by that. I mean, there are lots. Obviously, motivation is a huge topic in language teaching. It's really important to motivate your learners. And I suppose there's no, you know, how to keep track of new ways. Well, keep reading, I suppose. You know, again, sort of Google it from time to time and see what's out there. There's a lot of, you know, new material coming out at the time. So the head of our department, Emma Ushioda, is a real leading light in the area of learner motivation. And her work is, I would really recommend. She's really eminent in her field and very readable as well. I suppose, you know, you have to make sure that it's about for me, there's a lot that's to do with the rapport that you have with your teacher. That a teacher's, one of a teacher's main roles actually is to motivate learners, to give them a hand along the very long road that learning a language is. That realistically, you can learn anything online these days if you really want to, but it's difficult to do anything on your own. It's much easier if you've got someone who will show you the path and help you along it. So I think that your relationship with the learners is a major part of developing motivation.
Developing a humanistic approach. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important. I think that the rapport that you have with learners as a teacher is crucial, actually. If you can engage them, if you can, and engaging them. So if they like you and they will listen to you, and you can make it interesting for them, whatever you're teaching, then that's a really major part of the job done, I think. Because if they don't like you and they won't listen to you, then you can't teach them anything. However good your own knowledge is and however good your pedagogy is, then if they don't like you and they won't listen to you, well, you're on a hiding to nothing, I think.
Yes, that's totally true. The next one. How can I apply for CELTA and study online? Can I apply for CELTA and study online?
Yes. So at the moment, as I said earlier, there's the CELTA can now be taken fully online. And if you just Google fully online CELTA, there's plenty of centres that are running it like that. In fact, most centres, I think, are running it like that now.
There is another, but we will skip that because it is related to speaking. We have already talked about speaking. So how and when can I take CELTA online? The date?
Oh, well, anywhere. There are many centres running CELTA online. So, I mean, they're starting all the time. That's easy. Just Google it and you'll find plenty of centres that are running courses. Mm-hmm.
Okay. There is a question which is a little bit big. What is the future of distance learning?
Oh, well, that's a huge question, isn't it? Well, I think it's got, this situation has really pushed things so much. I mean, it's changed the face, I think, of distance learning, and will change, continue to change the face of distance learning. It's made everything move everywhere. It's been said, we've moved forward 5 years, and I think that's probably true because we haven't had a choice. So suddenly our department, for example, at Warwick, was not particularly interested in online teaching at all. We were very happy being a face-to-face environment, and there was some resistance, I guess, to online learning, perhaps a bit. It just wasn't seen as necessary because we had a good face-to-face model going, and suddenly overnight, we can't have lectures. All lectures have got to go online. So that's how it's going to be. And seminars hopefully are going to be face-to-face, but if we have another outbreak or whatever, then they'll have to be online. And so there's this huge push, this huge necessity. They say necessity is the mother of invention, don't they? Well, that's what's happened, obviously.
Well, we're starting our school soon, and they're going to be face-to-face, but there is a social distance classrooms and how to deal with them. We use the group work and pair work and stuff like that, especially with young learners. How can we deal with it in these situations?
Again, I wouldn't really be able to answer this any better than anybody else. I think, you know, we just have to learn new techniques. I think as teachers, we tend to be quite good at rolling with the punches. That's my experience, that, you know, a new curriculum is rolled out and we have to learn how to deal with it, or, you know, we're told to teach a different kind of class and we learn how to deal with it. And all we can really do is reflect on our practice and see what works, try something different. So, you know, John Fancillo is very prevalent with this idea of just try something different and see if it works. And if it doesn't, then try something different again and keep trying until you find it does work. I mean, my feeling is that even with social distancing, you can still do pair work. I mean, I'm still talking to people, even if they're 1.5 meters away from me. I just want to talk a bit louder, you know. Obviously there are all sorts of practical difficulties. I'm not suggesting it's going to be easy, but I think we're as a profession, we're good at dealing with adversity and change.
I guess so.
Okay, we want to go back a little bit to assessment. Do you think teachers or let's say, are there any effective way to assess English students apart from quizzes, apart from exams, you know, which are boring? You know,
I think that's really such an enormous question that it's, you know, I can't answer it. You know, it depends what you mean by assessment. Are we talking about formal assessment or informal assessment? You know, what's the assessment for?
Both.
It's such an enormous question. I think it's really impossible for me to answer. An assessment isn't my real area of expertise, so I'm going to pass on that one.
Formative assessment.
We have a question here in the comment from our viewers on Facebook. How can I start my literature classes for the first time for primary classes, and which kind of written material should I start with?
Again, you know, literature really isn't my area of expertise, so it's a bit difficult to. I'm certainly not going to.
What about writing? Starting writing with, starting writing with younger children with primary stage.
And again, really, primary children, you know, isn't my area of expertise. I qualified as a primary school teacher for English teacher, yes, okay. Students. I taught a couple of years, but I haven't got a lot of experience of teaching young learners, so I'm going to pass on that one too.
Well, the next question: what are the recent challenges in ELT?
Well, this is the big one, isn't it? This is the big one. What do you do when you can't be in a classroom with your learners? I mean, I think, you know, there's nothing else that overshadows everything at the moment. It's such a practical issue. So I think, you know, teachers who never saw themselves as online.
How do you guys cope with it?
Well, you know, I guess, as I said, we're all learning, aren't we? Everybody's learning. We're all people who, I mean, I've had quite a lot of experience working online and I enjoy it, and I enjoy working from home, and I enjoy making video materials. So, you know, in lots of ways that's kind of worked to my strengths. But, you know, of course you miss being in a classroom, you miss being in, you know, with the people that you like being with, and that sort of buzz that a classroom has. But I think that, so a lot of teachers who just didn't see themselves as online teachers have had to become online teachers. And you've got the two areas of, you know, can I deal with the practical issues of how do you use Zoom, how do you use a breakout room, what button do I press to start the lesson, you know, all of this kind of stuff, just very, if you like, the basic technical stuff, which people just didn't know, and you've got to learn it. But then also the other thing about, well, how do I make my lessons communicative and engaging in an online environment? Yeah, because I don't think it's a different animal, but it's a different species. You know, it's a slightly different things. There are some things that will work well online that don't work well in the face-to-face classroom, and things that work well in face-to-face environment that wouldn't work well in an online environment. So I think that that's the main challenge, is working out how those things are going to be, you know, how we're going to continue to be engaging and what have you in the online environment.
So we got some comments from the Facebook Live. We will pass them to you. So could you please mention again the name of the organization about scholarship?
The Hornby Trust. H-O-R-N-B-Y.
The Hornby
Trust. The Hornby Trust. So again, you can find, there's a link to it on the Warwick website, but if you just Google Hornby Trust, you'll find it. So A.S. Hornby wrote a learner dictionary, and the proceeds from that continue to fund the scholarship, which is about 10 students a year go from various designated countries come to the UK to do a master's in TESOL, and they also speak, or used to speak at IATEFL, at the IATEFL conference, and as I say, there are various other things that they did through the year. And it's an incredible group because they're people from all over the world. They're very bright, very proactive, and you know, I've really met some incredible people, incredible teachers through that program that's been, as I say, at Warwick. They've been some of our brightest stars, and it's a privilege, actually a privilege to work with people like that, and it's great.
It's a little bit competitive, right?
It's very competitive, yes. I'm afraid so, yeah. It's, you know, obviously you're being funded to come to the UK, and you get a stipend and your fees paid and what have you. So yes, it is very competitive. But you know, somebody's got to win it.
Yes. So this one is just open for students. Are there anyone?
No, it's for teachers. It's for experienced teachers.
Oh, not for students. Oh.
No, it's not for students. No, it's for teachers who want to do an MA in TESOL.
Oh, yes. Okay. There is another question on our Facebook Live. What strategies and techniques do you recommend to keep students interested in the new normal?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. What
strategies and techniques do you recommend to keep the students interested in the new normal?
In the new normal? Oh, okay. All right. Online. Well, I guess, you know, again, it's difficult to have a one size fits all for this, isn't it? Because what interests one group of students won't interest a different group of students, you know, and what will interest young learners won't interest adult learners. You know, it's a very wide question. But I think that knowing your students, you have to know your students. So find out what they're interested in talking about. I mean, for me, the beauty of English language teaching is that it's a skills-based topic. You know, you're learning a skill. So what you actually talk about, the content that you use, is pretty much up to you and up to the learners. So I think that finding out what the learners are interested in, and as I say, being careful that, as I said, I think the online environment exacerbates the potential for teachers to just be talking. And so I think you have to really, again, plan for learner-centered activities, plan for a learner-centered classroom. And that's, for me, that's the way to engage people. That's my experience, is that people, when they're involved in actually doing something, that tends to work well.
That was really a lovely answer. But maybe the absence of face-to-face interaction will affect the quality of teaching.
Look, I mean, I think it's inevitable to some extent, but I think there is good teaching online and good teaching face-to-face and bad teaching in both of those places, you know. And there are some obvious issues about the connection. For example, you know, I say I'm struggling sometimes to hear you, and that makes things difficult. It'd be much easier if we were in a classroom together or in a room together, you know. But we can't be, you know, and the affordance of this is that I'm sitting in Stratford in the UK and you're sitting in Morocco, and we can do this. So that's phenomenal, really. I mean, that's an amazing thing, and other people can listen. So I think that you have to be a little bit kind of tolerant, perhaps, of the ways in which it's not quite perfect, but it's pretty good. And it's getting better all the time. I think it will get better all the time. So we just have to be grateful that we've got this. Can you imagine if this situation had happened pre-internet? I mean, for me, it would have meant no work, really. I would have just had to stop working completely. And as it is, it hasn't really affected me that badly. I'm very lucky, I know. But, you know, this kind of situation there is such a lot to be grateful for.
So you mentioned you had an experience teaching in China, right?
No, in Taipei. I taught in Taiwan, so it depends whether you call that China or not, but I don't think it's separate. I worked there. That was my first teaching job in 1989. I started there a long time ago, but I was just teaching a private language school for a couple of years.
Your answers are very interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, that's nice. I'm glad to hear it. I hope some other people think so.
No, we actually we are learning from you. We are learning new tricks, new tips, new ways.
I think we all learn from each other. I think it's, you know, again, one of the great strengths of the internet, isn't it, that we can, you know, share stuff, that people can share stuff very easily and be motivated by each other, because it's really nice to be in contact with other professionals who are also interested in what they do. You know, if you're in contact with other people who are interested, and that's stimulating for you as a teacher, for us all as teachers, you know, if we're with people who are also going, oh, what about that, or could I do that, or why is that like that, or then that stimulates thought, and that keeps us interested in our profession year after year. You know, I've been teaching a long time, and I really love it, and it's never the same. It's always different. Year after year, it's different. I do different things, and I think that's, you know, great for my personal development and professional development.
Yes. What's the best thing you like about teaching?
Oh, there's so many things. The people is number one, I suppose. Great people, always great people. I've worked with, you know, the people I work with, the teachers, my colleagues. You know, it's rare that I've not liked any of my colleagues. I've had some really fantastic colleagues and fantastic students, and all sorts of different students. You know, I've taught in a lot of different places, and I've taught in private language schools, and I've taught in tertiary education and primary education, and in colleges of further education in the UK, and always just lovely students. And that ability, I think, because it's not, you don't have to teach some history dates or whatever, you can teach whatever's interesting to them, and so there's a real sense of it being able to be interesting and creative. I think that's the other thing for me, is that it's been endlessly creative. It's never been boring. It's always been different.
Yes. Do you think if teachers don't like what they do, they will fail miserably in their classroom?
If teachers don't like what they do, then? Sorry,
then they will fail in what they do. Your class. I said,
well,
if teachers don't like what they do, do you think they will fail?
I mean, I think that that's probably true of anything, isn't it? You know, anything that you don't like very much, you're not going to do very well. I mean, it's just inevitable. And of course, you know, some people get into teaching and then burn out because it's very stressful. I mean, the reason I left primary school teaching in the UK was because it was incredibly stressful. I found it so much work. I couldn't keep it. I couldn't keep up with it. And I take my hat off to anybody who works in that environment because I couldn't. So I think that you have to kind of try and find your niche, something that suits you. And I've been very lucky. I'm very privileged. I've been very lucky to be able to make choices about where I've worked, and I've had fantastic jobs. And I realised that, you know, not everybody's in the same position. I've got students who are from Warwick who I've had who, you know, working a teaching job, and then they're also driving a taxi in the evening and doing something else at the weekends as well in order to make ends meet, you know. So these things, it makes life very hard. And I think if you're working under those kind of circumstances and those conditions, then it's really hard to put a lot of joy and time and effort into your classes because you're too busy trying to make, you know, put bread on the table for your family. So I think that you have to be kind of careful about pontificating about those sort of things because life's difficult for a lot of people. Sometimes you might get into a situation, you're a teacher, you've trained as a teacher, you just don't have a choice because it's too late in the day, you've got, you know, a mortgage to pay or whatever, and you still got to do it even though it's actually really stressful for you now. But yeah, I think anything that you like, you do better at, basically.
That was a really lovely discussion. Can you take more comments from our Facebook Live?
Can I take more
comments?
Yes. Questions. You have someone here is asking about the silent method in teaching.
Ah, it's an interesting one. I've never tried it, actually. I know about it, Catena's, but I mean, I suppose the only thing I use the Cuisenaire rods. I quite like those, and I've used those, which are sort of an integral part of the silent method, but I've never tried it myself. I guess that's one way to increase student talk in a classroom, isn't it? If you're going to completely annihilate your own.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that probably for me, it's just a bit extreme. I think a lot of those methods that came up in the 70s, the silent way and Suggestopedia and all those sort of things, they've sort of found little bits of them have found their way into more mainstream teaching, CLT. But some of them perhaps are a bit, I think with any of those things, if you actually with anything, I think if you really believe it'll work, then actually it'll work. I think if you really believe something and you can take the learners with you because you've got enthusiasm for it and a passion for it, anything you've got a passion for, I think you can usually sell it to people and you can actually make it work. I've certainly in various different classes of, you know, different ways and seen positive things about these things, but it's not something I think I'd be suggesting, or probably these days anybody would be suggesting as a sole method for teaching a language, perhaps.
So there is no one single way.
No, I think, you know, the beauty of anything is variety, isn't it? You know, variety keeps things interesting.
We have another one about preparing a lesson plan according to individual needs and rather than group needs. So can you give it some hints about this?
I mean, sure. I think that obviously you need to be keeping your individual learners in mind. But again, it will depend so much on your context. If you're teaching one-to-one, then obviously, of course, you're going to deal with your individual learner. If you're teaching in a group of 6, then yeah, you should definitely be thinking about your individual learner. If you have 60 people in your class, then, you know, it's madness to think that you're going to try and think of individual learners, because you couldn't. How could you? I also think that there's a, you know, there used to be a very strong, I worked in a college of further education for a long time, and there was a very strong emphasis on individual learning plans, that everybody had to have their own learning plan and their own particular learning journey. And this had to be, you know, facilitated by the teacher. And I think that there's an element of, I don't know whether that being a really positive thing, but it became counterproductive because it was a sort of a one-size-fits-all. Everybody's got to have an individual learning plan, and it's got to be in English. And so I was dealing with students who had very low levels of English, and they were having to try and articulate what they wanted to learn. And it was stupid, really. And I think there's an element of, it's your job as a teacher to know what they need to learn. But obviously there's a balance. You know, there's no one right answer to any of a lot of these questions that come up from anywhere, not just now. I mean, I just mean generally, a lot of these sort of things are there's just no black and white answers. There are, it's all, well, it depends, and well, there's this, but there's that, and there's a balance between this and this that you have to achieve. And I think that's often the case. It's not about, well, this is the right answer and this is the wrong answer. It's, well, this is how, you know, where does the balance lie in that particular context? So it's very context specific for most things.
So we don't have all the answers.
No, and nobody has all the answers, do they? And I think the further you go down the road, the older I get, certainly, the more I realise that what I don't know.
There is no magic recipe for that.
No, I guess that's true.
That was really a lovely, interesting discussion with you. Maybe we can add something, comment from one of the audience. If we want to prioritize the English skills from very important to less important, which one do you think comes first? Writing, reading, or listening, or which one comes first?
I think that's another question that has the same answer that I just gave. It's that you can't answer that because it depends on the learner's needs. So if I'm learning English because, I don't know, I'm learning English because I want to read English academic books because those are the only, you know, then I don't need to learn to listen or speak. I only need to learn to read. If that's my, you know, that's a bit extreme. I know not many people would be in that position, but there are people who, you know, who would be learning largely to read academic texts because the academic work is in English and not in their first language. You know, if I want to go on holiday then and just learn a few phrases to get by with my English, then I don't need to learn to read and write, to write very much, at least, maybe to read. So I think, again, with all of these things, you can't prioritize them. You have to look at the context, and you have to look at, you know, what individual learners need. What I suppose I would say is that, you know, grammar has had the top dog position for a very long time, and that perhaps that should be demotivated a bit. And certainly Lexis is, I think, probably, you know, if you've got more words, then that's probably more important than a lot of time spent on obscure grammatical structures. But you know, that would be the only thing as a generalized thing.
Well, we have here someone
You
asking for your advice. If I want to start a career as a teacher trainer, how can I, steps, or, you know, how can I start?
Well, I think
recommendation.
as with anything, you kind of have to try and just get your foot in the door. It seems to me that this is an industry in which, there's often not a very prescribed route to anything, but you just have to kind of get your foot in the door. So if you're working in a school as a teacher, then offer to run a workshop for your colleagues, find out what they're interested in learning about, and offer to run a workshop on that. That gives you a bit of experience of being a trainer. So I think that, and then, possibly go to your next door school or whatever and offer to run the same workshop for them. And if you're offering it free, at least for the initial stages, then it's likely that you'll get some takers, I would have thought. Or with teaching associations, offer to run workshops for teaching associations if you've got a local one. Make YouTube videos and put them out. That's, for me, the making videos and making screencasts changed my professional career completely. So that's, make teaching tips and put them on YouTube. That will probably gather some, it takes a while, obviously, to gather a following and what have you, but that's a good way of doing things. Find yourself a job in a school which trains teachers. If you're working in a school where there are, teaching practicum students, offer to take one of them. I think it's always just about saying yes, putting your hand up, making that opportunity work for you. I think it's really, it's not very likely that you're just going to, from nowhere, go, oh, look, there's a teacher trainer position, I'm going to apply for it, and you get it, and then they train you. That's not usually how it works. It's usually about you being quite proactive about, your own CPD, so doing future learn courses, going to webinars, learning as much as you can, and maybe cascading that to your colleagues and what have you. Make yourself a teacher trainer.
Are there any recommended qualifications other than CELTA?
Yes, I mean, Delta definitely would be the next stage if you were interested in terms of Cambridge qualifications. An MA TESOL is a good thing to do. So I run, for example, on our MA, we have a particular module, which is called Teacher Education and Development, that I co-run with Steve Mann, Dr. Steve Mann, who's a fantastic colleague and a great teacher, and has is very, again, eminent in the teacher education field, has written a lot of books about this sort of thing. And we run sort of I run a practical mentor training program as part of that. So, all of those things, I think, if you're then looking for work that involves teacher training, then it's useful to be able to say, I have this background, this academic background in teacher education. But I think a lot of it will be, most people, I think, enter teacher education not via a I've been trained route, but via a I'm a good teacher, my work knows I'm a good teacher, and so they gave me this little bit of training to do, or what have you.
Did you have any idea about, maybe this will be the last comment or question. Any idea about the best way to teach pronunciation? Because, English teachers here are, they don't know whether to focus on the American way or the British way, or maybe a mixture of both.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it's, my experience is that the L1 interference will be so much greater than, any difference between American and British English, that it doesn't really matter, frankly. I don't think it matters. I mean, there are some things that you know, might be easier, and so the whole sort of can and can't thing, which in English is, you know, quite, in British English is quite distinct, whereas in American English the can and can't is not very distinct, so it might be easier in British English, for example. But generally speaking, my experience is that I rarely meet people who are second language speakers of English who I can really detect where they learn their English. It does happen. It happens actually in the UK more. I have students who have Birmingham accents, although they're Polish or whatever. And that's great to hear. It's lovely to hear. But it's quite rare. More often, and they still sound, you know, I could still say, well, I know that person's from Poland, but they obviously learnt their English in Birmingham. So I think usually L1 interference has a much greater effect than the small differences between, usually only vowel sounds that are, you know, different between different varieties of World English, different World English.
Yes. So L1 interference, you know, is a real issue, as you said. So do you speak any other language apart from English?
I've learnt many. Do I speak any well? No. Is my shameful admission, I suppose. I learned French and Spanish in school. I learned Bahasa Indonesia in Indonesia and Mandarin Chinese in Taiwan, and I worked in the Czech Republic, so I learned Czech. And I was married to a Kenyan for a long time, so I learned Swahili. But no, all of these languages I got to about, you know, intermediate, pre-intermediate, intermediate sort of level, and never went further. So that's my shameful secret.
So no word in Arabic, for example?
No, actually, I mean, you know, Salam alaikum, and that's really about it for my Arabic, I'm afraid.
Just Salam alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Okay. So it was a real pleasure meeting you today, and we had a really wonderful, great discussion with you. You know, you have actually reacted to all of the questions we have received. About some of them are repeated, but you have you know, reacted to all of them.
We've certainly had a wide discussion, haven't we? It's covered a lot of ground tonight.
Yes.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and it's always lovely to be involved with people like yourself who are taking the time and effort and energy to put something like this together, and to, you know, to really make an effort to help other teachers to develop or to provide something for other teachers. So I think that what I was saying about before about being motivated by other professionals who are very proactive, I think, you know, you're probably a prime example of that. So thank you, and I really appreciate you asking me.
Yes, thank you so much for this you know, webinar, and maybe we can meet you in future webinars, or maybe we can invite you someday to Morocco. Why not?
I would love to come. Yes, very much so.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, and Assalamu alaikum.
Good. Alaikum salam. Good night. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.